Hey everyone, I'm Pooch Van Druten, and that is...
This is still Chris Rabold.
Still.
Some form of Chris Rabold. Yes.
Still Chris Rabold. Still.
Yep.
Still here.
Still here.
Still around.
Yep. A little different than before. little less enthusiastic, but still here. Nah, I'm fine. Fuck it. This is great.
Oh, we've been busy. This is episode 44, Pooch and Rabold, and we haven't released in a couple of weeks, and we do apologize. But boy, life gets in the way, and we do stuff. And you've been doing gigs, and I've been doing stuff, and
yeah, those are good problems to have too.
It is.
If we're honest.
I mean, it's something that we're talking about, that as our lives get busier and busier, and we go back to our previous lives of being mixers, finding time to do this, because we do want to continue to communicate with you guys and have an outlet. So we're thinking about it, and we apologize for being gone for so long. So, but we're back. Here we are.
Pardon our tardiness. We had the best intentions.
Best intentions. Along with that was not just us not talking about what our future is. Chris and I have a lot of good things coming down the pipe. So stay tuned, and it's gonna be good. I promise. The wait will be worth it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, let's get back into this, man. I thought that today, and only because I was talking to a few other audio guys about what to do when your vocalist has the worst vocal, tics and issues, and the way that they hold a microphone, all the problems that come along with a vocal. What do you do when you have those issues? And I know I've had several artists that are just super, super hard. But do you want to start us off? What are some of the things that you do when you have an artist that's doing this kind of stuff, or softly singing?
Right. Some sort of vocal output, signal to noise problem in your
signal to noise problem with a vocalist, I think is maybe we'll start with that and move on. But, because literally, I work for Alanis Morissette, and her idea of holding a microphone is like this, and it's, I got to tell you, it was taking every little, little trick and tip that I could to get her over the top. And by the end of a show, I was, drenched in sweat and sitting down and going, oh my God. And that was every night. And so, do you have start us off? Do you have some tricks?
Yeah.
What's some tricks?
Well, I was going to say, I do. I have tricks, usually what it comes down to is really more like not a lack of tricks, but it's ultimately it's like a less is more is what's going to get you out of there.
Sure.
I remember, I think it was something we have done online recently was that thing for Harmon. And I think it was in that where noisy vocal mics came up, and I mentioned that is the problem. That is the number one problem, at least on a mix end, that you're going to have. There's nothing worse. There's nothing more destructive. And I don't think anything even comes close than a noisy vocal mic, because you have to feature that. And it is destructive in so many ways, not only unto itself in how it is not a good representation of your vocal, but what it's going to do to your mix that is now seemingly behind it.
So you're talking about having to gain it up so hot because the singer is not singing, the input side of it is low.
Yeah. Or conversely, where you have somebody that really is giving their all and they're kind of close, but the stage volume is such,
right?
Or they are in front of a PA or whatever the situation might be, Gosh, there's a number of ways. There's a number of thoughts on how I've dealt with this over the years. The biggest change in how I deal with it now is, whereas we have had gates in the past, I would always choose to know the material, mute the vocal manually.
Yes.
When applicable, ride it. If it's really not a mute moment, just duck it for a touch until they come, depending on what the song is, what the band is. Are there's, some acts, there's really no time to mute the, if it's Iron Maiden, there's guitar solos.
Totally.
So you can mute them for a while, but if it's whoever, some pop star or a rap artist or something, like it's a song and there's lyrics throughout. So the old
but you can do 50 dB fader juggles though in between stuff. Like
you can, exactly. Yeah. You can't. So manual is how I would handle that in the past. And in certain situations, I still absolutely do. Something we have now at our disposal is where I was going with this sort of opening thought, is now we have these tools, and I call them noise suppression devices, because they're not traditional gating techniques.
Right.
In Waves, PSE, Neve, 5045, or any of, and I don't know what the others are, but
WNS.
Okay, WNS, some of those kinds of things. So those are tools we now have to employ, but that's something we should get into, is how those are not a guarantee to work, right?
That's true. And sometimes if you have them set improperly, they can screw you over.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes if you have them set exactly right, the math is such that where the threshold is, and guys, if you don't know what these are, it's a dynamics device with a traditional threshold.
Yeah.
And at what point in time the signal exceeds that threshold, the signal then passes. How it handles the math on that varies from product to product, but it's a little different than just traditional amplitude sensitivity from how I understand it. But yeah, I mean, I'll get into some details of some of the Waves plugins because I know about them, but keep going. Got you. I know some of them are it's a phase thing where once it crosses the threshold, it flips, it goes out. But the thing is, that can be well and good, but if the extraneous sources in that microphone are always exceeding your intended source, meaning if there's a snare drum right behind Chris Rabold right here, it's always going to open it. So I'm never going to be the driving force, in which case, if you set it for what kind of works for me, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's not going to respond properly, And the timing might be such that even set to its slowest, if it has variable release, it might still be releasing too fast, and you're clipping words, you're losing words at the end of a phrase.
Yeah. So, yes. Before we get into that, I think though, before we get into that, and we talked about this a couple of episodes ago about microphone choice, but I can't express to you guys enough that even before we get to this point where we're talking about processing and we're talking about whatever, Chris and I have made the right decision to use the right microphone for someone. And so I think we need to re-stress that, even though we talked about it 2 episodes ago, re-stressing about, like, I have shown up to a gig where several engineers have been fired. I've shown up and rather than just piling on a bunch of plugins or whatever, I went straight to the source and said, that's the wrong microphone for her. And, I mean, there's a lot of politics and all of that. Maybe she didn't want to, it's a different feel, whatever. The monitor engineer, you got to think about, he's been there. He hasn't been fired,
That's a big one. Right.
So, but I will tell you that by changing the pattern of that microphone, so what was there was a pretty wide patterned, cardioid, microphone, dynamic microphone. And I changed it to a super tight, super hyper dynamic, hypercardioid patterned microphone, which in some cases can really screw you over because it turns into a lightsaber of sound. We've talked about that, but in her particular case, it tightened up everything. Like it got rid of all the stage that was happening. And it was a great thing for everybody. And that immediately took me to being 50% better, right?
Yep.
Before I then incorporated all the tools that you're talking about. So I guess I just want to stress it can't be stressed enough that if you're in a church and all your background vocals, there's 6 of them in a line and they're all wide cardioid in front of the drum kit, you might do yourself, if you're having issues, you might do yourself a favor by simply changing the microphone pattern, right? And have you found that to be like the case? Is that you're
100%,
Okay.
and you're right to backtrack. We should get back to just essentially capturing the source.
Yeah.
So recognizing there's a problem, and before implementing the tools, the processing tools rather.
Yes.
And
evaluating. We're about to get into that. I just thought that we should make it clear that point. we're Chris and I are making the assumption that you've made the correct mic choice to begin with, right? For instance, I'll give you an example. Chris and I, try to help as many people as we can, and we sometimes do some consulting for people. And people send me tracks all the time where immediately I listen to the track, which has no processing on it. It's coming straight from the mic pre of whatever the guy's console was or girl's console was. And immediately I know that, this could be helped by a change of a microphone. Like literally just by listening to the track, I go, oh man, this is the wrong microphone for this person. By eliminating, having side rejection for someone that sings softly, you'll eliminate a lot of that snare drum problem. And what'll happen is that when you get into talking about processing, which we're about to, Chris brought up the point that, hey, if the snare drum's louder than the vocal, the traditional gate opening of is just never going to work. If it's louder than the vocal, it's going to open the gate every time. But if you have a smaller patterned microphone, then hopefully it does some snare drum rejection, which then makes the snare drum lower than what her vocal is.
Right.
The things that you have to worry about in all of these, and it was really neat how you brought it up, is that for all these tools, if I have a vocalist that has some weird habits or is a struggle to get over the top, I never set it and forget it. I am juggling that vocal. I have that vocal fader going from -20 to +5 to -10 to 0 to the entire show. Yeah. Regardless of how cool my tools are. Yes. I'm still manually writing that person and drastically.
Same. And you know what? To that point, if you give me the driest live vocal you've ever heard with the best technique in the world.
Yes.
But then you also give me right next, or then you take that away and then you give me the worst you've ever heard. That's the most ambient. My finger is on it and it is moving with equal. I once 100%. Heard, I brought his name up here a lot because I respect his work in the studio world. Andy Wallace talked about when he writes automation, that if you were to, and he was an SSL user, I'm assuming still is, that you would look at the desk and that the faders all but look like they're just like all of them. I mean, the overhead, he's just doing this, and that's me with a vocal fader. Me too. There are some artists, and we've discussed it on here, where I am literally, I use the word scared. I am apprehensive to take my finger off of it for the safety
there's artists
of all involved. You know what I mean? Like I literally, like if I go to manipulate a piece of gear or a plug-in or have to speak to someone, my finger stays on the fader.
Dude, if I have to reach further than I could reach, I'll grab with my left hand now on that fader and grab something and pull it over. And now fingers never leave that master fader. That's not master fader, the vocal fader. Yeah. The money fader. Right. And so much so we've talked about this in the past. It's like, it's written into every bank you know, so it's like bank safed all the way through, so that even if I'm in some weird mode of going after a guitar sound, I still, I never let go of it. I never leave it alone. It never, you know, with someone that has bad vocal technique, I'm probably doing more writing, and it's a little bit more like on the edge, you know what I mean? It's like it could just basically take off if I push that fader to +5. It's right on the edge of like taking off.
And part of the reason for that ride too, I would be willing to bet, I know for me, is that vocal, because it is so hot, it's right on the edge, you probably aren't able to use you definitely aren't able to use as much compression as you'd like on it. So not only are you kind of taking it where it needs to be and then moving safe, you know,
it's like manual compression
safely back, you are manually maintaining a consistent level. And that's another thing too, is if you get to work with an artist to where you just really, really know the music, you begin to anticipate their vocal performance and know when they need pushes here and there. So it's multi-level, or it's multifaceted, the reason to ride it. It's for safety, protection's sake, meaning in terms of feedback, this and that, but also to maintain a consistent level that we're not able to do because we can't just slam it with a compressor and let it sit there, you know?
Also with the whole feedback thing, know that if you take a fader, push it to +3 and let go of it, and it is on the edge of feeding back, it will create a feedback loop if it just stays at that same amplitude. Right. But if you just move that, I'm talking a dB, you break that cycle of that feedback loop. And so you can actually push a vocal much hotter than you could if you just set it there at +3 or +5.
Like basically take it. And a lot of times, man, that's a great point. A lot of times we take it to the point that 100% would it feedback if you left it there.
Totally would.
Like I go to +7 for the phrase, and if I were to let go, it's guaranteed to come back, but I'm coming back. And here's now you've got all kinds of thoughts popping into my head. Most of my lead vocals, most of them, and again, even the ones that give me a lot of level, if you put me in an empty room during the day and I take that and the whole system's on, and I take that vocal to where it will be at its hottest point during the show, it won't subtly feedback.
Oh no.
It will, you will have every member of the crew doing the, ooh, what? You know, like it's going to be vicious, but I know it's going to be okay come showtime. And I also know I'm not going to leave it there. And that right there is a big part of where people get in trouble with their sort of ringing out techniques during the day, is they push it there in an empty room, and then they cut it, and then they push it again, and then they cut, you know, and they're losing their gain overall. So
absolutely. That's exactly what they're doing. They're losing all the gain that they needed to get that person over the top. I do the same thing. You know, I'll do, monitor engineer walking out to the edges of stuff, you know, and stuff will start to take off. And if it's a monitor engineer that I haven't worked with before, they'll be like, oh, you know, and you know, with the speaker or whatever. And I just go, I'm not worried, game, dude. We're not playing that.
I love hearing you say that, because I don't either. I'm like, I'm not going after that. It's fine. Or they'll look at me like, did you hear that? I'd be like, I sure did.
I heard it. It's going to be fine. I promise you.
Yeah. Because that floor that it's now shooting onto and bouncing back up at you, it will be covered in bodies.
That's exactly right.
You know,
bring in the water bags.
Right.
Now, after post-COVID.
I know. As I said that, I was thinking of a floor covered in bodies, and I'm like, yeah, but let's just pretend we can still do that, you know? But we will. We will
bring in some more real water bags.
I tell you what, man, that's a sidebar tangent here real quick. I have thought, I know, warning. I have thought about this a lot during COVID about, of course, there's a million, I don't want to get us too far down a COVID tangent.
That's all right.
There's so many ways in which reopening will begin, you know, and I'm not here to tell you I have the crystal ball to tell you exactly what it looks like, but with, you know, limited capacities is one thing that is not going to happen. It already is happening. People are doing shows in that way. And aside from the show suffering as a whole, because it just won't be as exciting, the vibe won't be there, this and that, the production element that is going to take the biggest hit on that is going to be us. because we are literally sitting here telling you, I'm not worried about these things because I know I'm going to have a full house. And there is now a reality where we are guaranteed to not have a full house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I've thought about that a lot. I'm like, man, it's going to be like, there's going to be, for people who do shows like that, it's going to be like your worst night every night for a little while, not forever.
Yeah, for a little while. But I still think, part of it is the floor doesn't have to be packed. There just has to be something blocking reflective surfaces.
And something breaking up the
reflective surfaces. And even at 50%, the amount of people, it will be doing that.
You've done
yes,
that.
There'll be pieces of floor that you can see, but yeah. I mean, I hear you, dude. It's like we literally, both Chris and I are, we'll do the whole sound check thing and be like, nope, we're going to be fine. And literally, someone else may have turned that up to 0, had the whole PA just
freaked themselves out, freaked everybody else out.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure at this point in our lives with this, I've mentioned this on here, but if I can get away with it, meaning there's not like management or NMD or someone out front, I'll do however long a sound check is with the lead vocal really not that loud.
Oh yeah, me too.
I know it's there. I know it's going to be fine. This is for them up there.
Yeah.
And I will routinely have it at least 5 dB lower than it's going to be during the show.
Me too.
And because also in that empty room, it might be harsh and abrasive at that level. And I don't want to, I don't want to deal with that. I wanted to now that I'm really, the wheels are spinning, I wanted to go back to something we were talking about. You were talking about the right microphone choice. And we've spoken on here a lot about if you are fortunate enough to work with either a younger artist, an emerging artist, or just an agreeable artist that at any point in their career is willing to listen and learn and take feedback from you, that you can work with them on mic technique to help this. Something else you can do with people that check those boxes is to work on stage volume. And this is coming to mind now because I didn't mix much in November or December of this past year. Not that I've mixed a lot, but like you're saying, we both take projects or have a little bit going on. So I mixed this from some live tracks, made a mix for someone from a band. And I know for a fact it was the same microphone in this one thing that I did, which was from the year 2000. And then this past week, I went and revisited some tracks from them. Mind you, it was 8 years later, and it was, the first time was outside, the second side was inside, so variables were not the same, but it was a band, it was that Widespread Panic band that I worked with for so long. I remember what all was different, and it was stunning how much more shit was in the vocal mic.
Wow.
And these weren't like, it's not like I started with them when they were 25, like they were adults when I started with them and were just further adults. But I remember guys changing gear. And I remember the bass player going from ears and a single 410 behind him to moving to wedges again, to coming back full circle to wedges, and then having two Ampeg, two SVTs on their side. So 16 8-inch speakers.
Yeah.
What's an SVT?
Eights,
right?
Eights, right?
Yeah, I think so. God, I'm so out of the game. But so 16 of those.
Yes.
And then he had two 18-inch subs too as well. And from there, it just lit off everyone else somehow getting louder. And the first thing that I mixed when they were outside was a joy. There was nothing in the mic. I could do whatever I wanted to it dynamics-wise. I could do whatever I wanted to with it effects-wise. This next thing I looked at, just looking at the waveform, I was like, oh shit, he is barely bobbing above water,
Yeah.
So anyway, stage volume. If you can get some sort of, if you can have some legitimate impression on artists about their stage volume, that's equally as important as mic technique. Wouldn't you agree?
Great point. Yeah, absolutely. I work for a legacy artist that there's no change in them. They've been doing it for 40 years, and the stage is going to be loud, and that's the way it is. And so you just deal with it. But like you said, if any of those boxes are checked, man, do yourself a favor and have conversations about how to reduce the volume of the stage. It will help everyone, not just you. It'll clean up all their ears and they'll all go, what? Why does this sound so great now? You know? I was lucky enough. I worked with Linkin Park the entire time and their stage volume was almost non-existent.
Amazing.
Like not even side fills really. I mean, they had wedges and they were there a little bit, but I mean, you know, actually it's not true. The stage right guitar player, the guy that wears the earmuffs, his wedges were kind of loud over on stage right, but it was all just guitar. So it was like the only thing that I ever had to fight in vocal mics was guitar because everything else on the stage was like quiet. And that's just a joy to mix, dude. When you've got that going on, it is amazing. Yeah, it is. It's like being in a studio, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I can.
Yeah. It's amazing how I don't want to say easy vocal mixing can be because it's not, but it is just a whole other game when the ambience is lower. You can EQ the source, not the source plus its friends that are hanging out with it, you know, and you can employ compression, not just for dynamic control, but for shaping tone or creating excitement or, or any of that stuff versus, it's just damage control from
all I'm doing is trying to make it here. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I've had those artists where it's all damage control, it's all, and I've had to acknowledge, like if another sound engineer comes to the show, they're like, I'm sure they're going, oh, that vocal doesn't sound all that great. And it's like,
that's when you get your buddy or your peer before the show and you just have to just wallow and just go,
listen,
dude, I got to tell you before it starts. Yeah. I know. Yeah.
You have no idea what's happening here. For you to understand the vocal.
Yes.
We're working miracles over here,
Yeah.
And so, you do your best in those situations, but in those situations, there are drastic things happening. Some of them are, I don't know about you, but, I don't remember. Were you on the Justin Bieber thing? Were you using a 50-45 or were you using a PSE?
I had 50-45 on that.
Okay. So then I switched everything to be in the box and I was using a PSE. But we were both utilizing that. And as the tour went on, after Chris had left, we started doing stadiums where there was like, an automation piece that put him 60 feet in the air, right in the long throws of PA, 60 feet in the air in front of PA, like the far corner of it was horrible. And I got to tell you, and I've said this before, that there is no way I could have survived that without a piece of gear like PSE or 50-45.
Right.
I just wouldn't have survived it. I've been fired. There'd been no other, because you wouldn't have been able to hear his vocal at all. So there are those tools. So the PSE, primary source expander, if you don't know anything about it, is a tool that I use almost on every vocal, even if the vocalist is great.
Me too. It's a default now. It's not even a question.
No. And what it is, it's a vocal gate, but it's also it's an intelligent vocal gate. It's focused at vocal frequencies. And you'll notice that it is not wherever the threshold is set, that is what opens a gate. It's a ramp up kind of a gate, right? So you still hear the vocal, even though the signal has not passed the threshold. So even setting that threshold higher than when you're looking at the highest part of the signal, you're still hearing some of the vocal down here. It's got a big ramp to where the opening part of the gate is. And that's true of the 50-45 as well. It's intelligent in that it's focused specifically for vocal frequencies. And it just works amazingly, especially like on a vocalist that's killing it. It cleans up your mix.
It's cheating.
It's cheating.
If you have
it's black magic cheating.
Okay, there are situations where it is unusable because of the signal to noise. It doesn't, at a certain point, the signal is the signal, even if it's not your intended signal. So there's points in time
if things are louder in your microphone than that vocal, that tool is not going to work. Period.
Then you're done. And we'll get into here in a second how you can, at least like on the 5045, kind of work around that and make decisions on the opening of it. Yep. But it can go from, let's say it can work, it will save your ass from something that was previously unusable, to, if it's a good vocalist, it's just like cheat. It's just, you've got the cleanest source you've ever had live without having to manually mute and unmute the vocal. Which in the past, you and I both, in all mixers, or most mixers that cared to, were constantly muting and unmuting, vocals throughout the whole show. It was just, and now I'm so lazy between automation and source enhancers like this that now I don't have to do it. I rarely do that anymore. Yeah.
So it's a tool, right? And it is, there are definitely different ways that you can set it. Just like what Chris said, you can set it to be super hard and close really deep. For a vocalist that's killing it, right? Like any vocalist that's getting up in it, they give you a really nice signal. You can set the threshold super high. You can set it really deep so that when they're not singing, it's basically like it's muted. But for a vocalist that you're struggling with, and even one where there's a few things that are maybe louder than their vocal, you can set the threshold really low and then set the depth of that to be really kind of high, that you turn the plugin into kind of an automatic writing tool.
Yes.
Like you're already manually writing it, but this helps you just a little bit more. It just helps you, you're doing all the same kind of moves that this thing is doing, but I'm telling you, just having that engaged, it's the little things that matter, and that little thing will help you a bunch. So even with a vocal that is, almost impossible, I've used it as a, Waves has a thing called Vocal Writer, right? That's a cool plugin too, but this is different.
Yeah. And that's a little more self-driving car can get away from you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. This is more helping you in the moments when they aren't singing just that much more. Yes. To get it right. Yeah. So I encourage you, even with a vocal that is really nasty and you're like, oh man, the snare drum's like, way louder. Don't set it up like you would a gate. Don't engage it like you want to with a really good vocalist. Use it in a sparingly more way, and it will still help you a little bit. Yep. So I have it literally on every vocal. It's it used to be the 5045, and now it's this tool, this plugin.
Here is a couple. I wanted to talk about some sort of user applications for both that I know you and I can riff on, but also, and before we do that, I wanted to mention, here's some further theory that of my own that I know you'll probably concur with on using these devices. Aside from the fact of, is it going to work on my vocal or not, you have to keep in mind as well, if it isn't a powerhouse vocalist, when it opens, you are getting the vocal, but does the mix, you're already shaking your head, does the mix change dramatically to the extent that a couple things, one, is it just too hokey? Yeah. And I don't usually get to that, but if you fine tune it just right, it's always usable. But you know what I'm saying? When it opens, suddenly is it just super obvious that the ambience is coming and it's that pumping, sucking sound, Yep. And so if you decide, you know what, yeah, it is kind of, it's a lot. What I will do with softer vocalists is, who I'm just barely getting what I need out of it, is like you said, the depth, You would think with the softer vocalist, you would want maximum depth, meaning that for it to close 60 dB, the exact opposite. I'm putting it at like 10 because that person is probably just barely getting it to open at all. And the range of the depth plays a role in the time constant. On PSE, you can change fast, medium, and slow.
Yeah.
But slow to 10 is different than slow to 60, you know? So if they're just barely opening it, it's going to be hauling ass to get to 60 versus just kind of taking its time to get to 10. I hope you guys are following what we're saying here. But so if I have a vocalist is just barely getting by, it is set to only do a little bit, you know, and it has to have a slow release. And I typically will have the slowest release possible that still maintains vocal feedback suppression, right?
100%.
And I'll tell you this, there's something I want to say on the PSE, but on the 5045, I'm still a big user of that with one particular artist that I work with, because I like this, aside from the fact that it works, I have to play it on the person. Like I'm literally, it's just like I said, you start to know their vocal thing. I know there's even times when I have to turn it off, and it scares me because the 5045's little switches are janky feeling. And I'm always worried one of these days I'm going to hit it and it doesn't turn blue, or worse, rather, it doesn't not turn blue. Like it won't unmute.
Yeah.
So I'll play it on that one where the PSE has greater functionality and greater release. You have more variability in release times, in frequency, keying options. The one thing that it doesn't have that the 5045 does have is it's actually like an attack release button, but it has something that will change the attack time. And it goes from peak to RMS. And it does exactly what it says. It's either going to respond based on peak level or on RMS level. If a snare drum's popping, you basically have to use RMS or it's going to open all the time. But in doing that, you're cutting off the leading edge, the transient of the vocal. So you guys see where it's this constant like weighing of what is the proper move at the right time. And that's a big one. If I got a soft vocalist, I basically have to choose the RMS because it's going to be less sensitive to really almost always the snare or the claps or the whatever's the loudest transient. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. 100%. The thing that we should also point out is that, you know, people always ask us about virtual playback, and it's like, this is where virtual playback is your friend. And literally, I know this to be true. Chris and I both spend hours and hours working on this one stupid little plugin, or in Chris's case, the 5045, doing minute changes and saying, okay, I think that's going to work now. Let's listen to it in a different part of the show.
Right.
And then I also include, part of what I like about the PSE is that I can include it in snapshots, and I include threshold changes in snapshots depending on songs. This is as we go in the tour. Like, I'm not going to know this right from the beginning, but as we go, I'll be like, oh, there's always like Chris was talking about how he actually plays the 5045. I do that, but kind of with snapshots sometimes. If it's a really difficult artist, I've actually had snapshots that the only parameter that it's changing is the threshold of that 50 of the PSE.
Yeah, that's cool.
Everything else is safe. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just that. And also be careful to screw yourself over in between songs.
Yes.
When they go to talk.
That's what I'm saying. That's when a lot of times, but that can look different ways. There's some artists that are the scaredy cat with the vocal.
Oh, and when they talk, they're like twice.
What's up, Miami? You know what I'm saying? And you're like, where the hell has that been this whole time? Yeah. Right.
I know, but be careful with that. And I actually have had an artist that talked very softly, and I had to write a talk snapshot. Yeah. That was, basically just bypassed the PSE, but not all the way, because it was like, that mic was fully on edge the entire time,
Yeah.
So
yeah, you can hear it too when it's like, again, the thing with a sweet spot, not in what we're talking about here, but and honestly, not even just in mixing in general, is a sweet spot is generally the finest of fine lines.
yes.
And when you find that sweet spot with this thing, on the bad side of it, more so in PSE, is this weird phasey clear, like it working.
Yeah.
It's actually behaving just like it should. You have just put it in a precarious situation, and much like if someone were to come to a lot of my sound checks and hear the vocal buried and would have the bravery to ask me if that's where I wanted it, at which point I would say, yeah, I'm very well aware it'll be fine once it matters. I've also had a PSE set in some of these recent COVID era things where I've been doing some streaming stuff, and assistants have asked, they're like, hey, do you have the PSE? And I'm like, yeah, I know. They're going to be, I trust that when it happens, they're going to be singing loud, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. But right now I'm going to sit there and let it kind of get weird and not sweat it too much,
They're just trying to help.
And they are, and they're not wrong in their assessment.
They're right. They're right. But you know that you're.
I know. Yeah. And they're God, that's live sound right there. There's so many things that it's just like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Nope. Not worried about it. Thank you though.
Well, and that's really something that we should bring up, and not to take us down that road and that rabbit hole, but there's something to be learned about when to chase something and when not to chase something, right? Like that is, I think that's part of experience and the magic that you learn as you go along. In your early years, you might spend, an hour chasing a vocal, feedback thing or, whatever. But here we are later on in our careers, and we're like, yeah, so what? It's taken off. It's not gonna later. I promise you.
I'm just not worried about it.
Yeah. So that's something that I don't know how to teach that, but it is something that you need to teach yourself and kind of learn like what things are important, and you should address that right now versus, oh, I know that's going to be okay later. Those are two different things that you have to kind of learn what the differences are in that.
And there's nothing but time that will provide for that.
That's right. And experience and just, those are the type of things that I struggle with teaching someone and sharing with someone, because they're specific to a certain situation. Right. And it's a situation that I've been in 100 times, let's say, but it's maybe a situation that this person has only experienced once. It just comes with experience. There's some of those things.
Yep.
All right. So if it gets really bad after the 50-45, do you have any tools after that?
Well, let me just share real quick. Let me do this. Let me share one user trick.
Okay, cool.
Or user tip. It's not a trick. It's a functionality they built in for this very reason. If you are using the PSE, which I would love to wear the PSE is what I'm using, because I just feel more.
I get it. And I totally get it. And by the way, guys, I don't know if we even said the 50-45 is a hardware unit made by Neve. It's a one space unit. And the PSE and the 50-45 basically do the same thing. That's
right. And the 50-45 was the predecessor to the.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's why we've used them both and still do. But I like using the PSE because that generally means I have a vocalist I have a little more confidence in. Like you can leave it up there as your, what's it called now in a way, like your hot plug-in or something.
Yeah.
So you can leave it to where it never, nowadays you can, where you can always get to it quickly. Part of the thing that freaked me out about PSE early on was I couldn't see it all the time. And I was used to seeing it. But anyway, user tip. And this happened the other night when I was going through, was looking at these tracks and going, God, the vocal's so much louder here. And I was like, could I do this on this vocal? And this was just me at home mixing in the box. So I pulled up PSE and using it in some of my normal stock set it way. I was getting ready to say set it and forget it, but just sort of the normal ways, it actually wasn't usable. It was like, damn it. It could be if, like, the reason I'm going to be using this tracks is not going to be for a live show. It's going to be for some of stuff that we're doing, and people are going to be listening critically, and they will hear the errors. If it's just for a live show, you can kind of get away with some errors every now and again. But it was like, damn it, I can't. What I did is I went in further. Here's a user tip. Utilize that sidechain key function. You're not going to be keying it from a separate source, but you can, key solo, you can listen to it. And whereas it is designed, from what I understand, and this is what you mentioned earlier, to be kind of vocal centric anyway, you can get in there and fine tune it. And I found that with this particular person, like most people, the real focal point of their vocal, I basically took that key filter and it was all but telephone. It was 300 to 2 or 3K-ish.
Yeah.
If you go too low with the frequency, you're going to lose leading edge transient that'll make it open.
That's right.
But if you get it in a sweet spot that truly is the focal point of that vocal, by doing that, I then gained the extra 3 dB in threshold that I needed to now make it usable. So guys, hopefully you can use it without having to go to that key thing. But if you find yourself in trouble, or if you just want to dig into it, do that. Go look there.
Dude, that's a great tool. I have used key type of things. And here's a little side note to that. When using something that is keyed, remember that that's never going to be a piece of audio that anyone's going to hear. You're using that key to be the trigger of something. Mm-hmm. So what I do is, solo it so that you can hear whatever the trigger signal is, and literally 20 dB of EQ, just sweep and find that resonant frequency that is happening in that vocal. Just find it and be like, that's what I want the gate to open, is on that frequency. Because if you do that, now you're tricking the PSE into only looking for that resonant frequency, that's happening. So don't be afraid of making your key input be like crazily sounding.
It's the same reason that we can use piezo pickups on the side of a drum to open. No one's hearing it, and if they did, we'd all be fired, because it's going on a ton. It's going clank, clank, clank. It's just reference signal for the side chain to go, oh, that's what you want me to listen to? No problem. So in this particular situation, it gave me, it was just about 3 dB, but that's all I needed to then go, okay, cool, now I can use it.
It's the little things that matter, guys. And I think people get frustrated with the 5045 and the PSE because they do drastic things and then go, it's not working. Now it sounds like a gate. And now it's, now it's open all the time. Literally, Chris and I are doing tiny, minute changes and, finding that spot. It's not something that we just go crank and done. It's something that we're like, okay, it's a moving target kind of. But if you are really in trouble, right? There's a couple more plugins that Waves makes that I've used in the past, and I've actually used these 3 plugins in a chain before, using all 3. And one of them is X Feedback. Which is a pretty great tool. Basically, it's just an EQ that you can set it to a listen mode and find frequencies that are starting to take off, and let it automatically find the frequencies that are taking off, and with super narrow cues. But remember, it's an EQ, so it's hacking it to shit,
right.
If you let
and it stays static. It's
static, and it stays that way. But if you use it a little sparingly, it can be just that little thing to help you with the PSE. You know what I mean? It's just that little bit to get another 3 dB gain out of that fader, because you're cutting, 6 dB of whatever the offensive feedback frequency is. So I have used that. Right. And then finally, the third one that I always use is called WNS, which stands for Waves Noise Suppression. And It is a tool that is basically frequency selectable gating in 4 different bands. And it's originally designed for and still used widely for dialogue in movies. But if you utilize it in a rock and roll situation or a pop situation, it actually can help you in addition to PSE. So it is basically it is a PSE, but now you have 4 bands that you can decide are opening at different times. Frequency related. So for instance, you could, set up a chunk of from, whatever, 1K to 3K that opens quickly to grab those transients, and then have, the lower part of the vocal, 400 open a little bit slower. And it's basically like a customizable gate.
Right.
I don't find that it works very well by itself. Like I wouldn't say, oh, this is the tool to use instead of PSE, but in conjunction with PSE with a really offensive vocal, it's cheating, it's like, you can get away with stuff that nobody else can get away with. So I know that is a plugin that most people don't really know about because it's a dialogue plugin. It's in the Waves post section, it's or broadcast post section. So most live guys don't pay attention to it. But try it if you have a license for it. It's pretty amazing. Or go demo it. If you have a vocal that you just can't manage, it's my suggestion after the PSE.
Yeah. I was sitting here thinking, if I have a situation where the PSE 5045, whatever, is not working. It's just not working. It's not going to work. I reserve the right to bail on it altogether.
Sure.
And
I have all the time.
Yeah. At which point, welcome to where we were not even 10 years ago. Like then you're just back to normal. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And at that
back
point,
to this.
And if it gets to that point, that's not sensation, but that phenomenon that I was mentioning earlier of every time the vocal comes in, it's super, super, super excitable to the mix as a whole, is probably exaggerated to the highest degree, at which point you are best served to leave it off, take that vocal manually where you want to get it, where you can, and then do either the big ones or actually commit to never going too far because it's so dramatic.
Yes.
And
that's a really good point, dude. You know what?
You have to embrace it. It becomes part of your sound, I
tell people this all the time. I survived some shows with Alanis Morissette by simply turning the whole thing down.
Yep.
Like literally, I was like, okay, the only way I'm going to survive this is, yes, everyone wants to hear a rock show at, 102, but tonight
we're not doing
it. Be 100 because I just can't make it.
Yep.
And would you rather hear the vocal and have it at 100, or would you rather go to a show at 102 and have it taking off the entire night?
Right.
So there are actually times where I will do left hand master fader and right hand vocal and do this stuff.
Yeah.
Master fader down, vocal fader up, getting rid of anything else that's coming down your mix bus but the vocal, and do this kind of a juggle. Master fader down, vocal fader up, and keep it at a nominal level. So that's great. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. I know you've heard about people that would, if they had a vocalist that it was just super loud, or the stage was the vocal was not, the leakage into the mic was super loud, or the stage was loud, whatever the deal was, committing to that sound.
Yes.
And delaying everything to that's an old trick, where you get to, and the problem, and I just said the same thing, but just without the delay. The problem is you can embrace it as your sound, which is great, until the guy or girl does then you're embracing another sound. So you're not embracing a consistent sound. And there again, so you hear us saying that, and it's like, okay, neato, Pooch and Rabold. So what's the answer? It's like, there's not one.
There's
You just
not
deal.
one. Sorry.
You just deal, you know.
There's not one, but there is. The answer is never give up.
Right.
And don't let it beat you. Like,
right.
And those are hard. I mean, honestly, I will tell you, those clients of mine that are hard,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm asked back, those are moments where I go, am I able to spend 4 months of just beating myself to a pulp every day to try to make this happen? Like, is it right mentally for me to go do that?
Yes.
And sometimes the answer is no, because
it can be soul crushing, especially when you know you've got a slam and mix right behind it.
Yeah.
But you're either turning it down or you're adding destructive ambient noise to, you know, it's just, you're like, and again, it's that thing of like, I know this isn't good. But this is not what I want. You know,
it's not what you want, but it's the best that it can be, and it's better than anybody else has done it.
Exactly. And I'll tell you what, to further that thought, I have clients, or to just kind of, I don't know, bounce around sort of the same thing. These difficult clients, you know, just getting the vocal out there at all is a win. And a lot of times they're phenomenal vocalists, but it's just all the other variables are working against you, or they and their technique are working against you, so that the simple presentation of their vocal, even if it's not tonally pleasing, even if it's not all of those things, is enough to make for a good show. And people that would be inclined to be like, hey, that sounded really good, what are you doing? I'll tell you exactly what my vocal chain looks like at that point. There is a high pass filter set wherever I need it. There is an EQ doing only subtractive EQ. Then there is maybe a dynamic EQ multiband, just because I put that in front of my compressor. And then there is a compressor that may not be doing anything at all. Maybe, I hope it does something, but probably not. And there's your that's it.
That's it.
It's just this chain of damage control in my finger, and that's the best you can, and that's it. Those are the tricks, you know.
That's true.
So
but it's all of those little things along the way. You know, we've talked about this a lot. It's like 80% of being a sound guy, all of us have. Everybody in this community of sound, we're all 80% good sound guys. You want to be world class? It's the other 20%. And that 20% includes little tiny details like this, you know? And if you get those things right over a course of many inputs, the end result is something unbelievable and above what anybody else can do. So I stress to you, don't ignore the little things.
No.
You know? Don't ignore those tiny tools, you know?
And don't like literally think of everything. You know, does this make a giant difference since what I'm getting ready to mention? It has. Does it usually? Nope. You know, if it's a vocal position that doesn't move, or if it's several different mics together, like some background vocalists, and there's just some cack and there's some this and that, play with the relative phase of that microphone to whatever. You can, in fact, take the lead. We're mainly talking about leads,
but yeah.
You can change the polarity of that and affect its relationship to the PA as a whole if it doesn't move. You can do sections to where it's affecting both the relationship to the PA and its relative level to one another. A lot of times you're kind of just hunting and pecking, going, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'll never forget, sort of anecdotally, I worked with this one monitor engineer one time, and he told me, and the guy never stopped moving. He's on a wireless mic, never stopped moving the whole time. And he told me how much better the vocal worked out of phase for him. And I'm thinking, out of phase to what? The guy's it's never in a relative position, but you know, but I was like, but I'm glad you think that, you know what I mean? Well, it's like,
that works for you.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is, like, don't be afraid to reach for all the things, you know?
Yeah. And don't be afraid to keep hacking away at it. I mean, I don't give up. Like, you know, when I have when I'm struggling with a vocalist, it's an everyday thing. It's not me going, okay, well, I've tried PSE and I've tried WNS and I've tried the mic change and that's it. I'm whatever. There's nothing I can do. There's no, you know, I don't ever say that ever. No. I go, you know what? Today I'm going to, you know, I lie in my bunk in my bus going, there's got to be something. I got to fix this. There's got to be something. And eventually I come to some convoluted path that hopefully makes it a little bit better. But do we always win? No.
And, you know, speaking of convoluted paths, we've talked about this on here before. You know, if like a PSE or any of these things is just not working for you, like we're saying, but it's almost working for you, well, then take what's almost working and throw it on you're probably barely able to use your effects, but now throw that on the effects send because there it will work good enough. Like, because good enough is going to be enough for a reverb send, or, you know, or back to go to your aux send, talk about making key inputs weird just to work, man, hack that thing up, because it's just, you know, there's, again, just keep fighting, you know, keep fighting.
Yeah. Don't, that's a great thing. Just before we're kind of out of time here, but, don't EQing aux sends to effects is something that a lot of people don't do. The input side, you know, so whatever the vocal is going to an aux 1, for instance, then that aux 1 master out going to that reverb is EQ'd very differently than my vocal channel is.
Absolutely.
So those are all things you can utilize to make it better. We didn't even get into the whole, you know, having the effects part of this help you. But you mentioned some things there right at the end that may help you. Don't give up, do the little things. Hopefully you learned a little bit about making a hard vocal be better.
Hey, don't give up, period, by the way. Like, with everything we're all going through right now. Speaking of don't give up. Right.
Oh, well.
Yeah. I mean, like, big picture right now.
Big picture.
Like, and I'm saying that for us too. Like, that goes for all, we're all in this. I get it. Yes, you know.
Yes, we are. And, you know, I mean, there's some light on the end of the tunnel here, guys.
Absolutely.
I saw that some European festivals in the UK are going to happen. My point is that there is some light at the end of the tunnel here, guys. I think we're going to see some stuff start to come. So don't give up.
We'll get there.
Hang in there. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Hopefully it'll be closer than, 2 weeks or so, but we'll do our best.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Talk to you soon. See you.
All right. See you, everybody.